Should I
And
try
I don't know how many times we want to say squat during the show,
I
but
think-
at least one time.
I don't know what the squat you're talking about.
I think I usually say squat only in groups of 3. I like to batch them, like squat, 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 and that's
Squats.
when I say squat.
Do you do squats when you work out, Scots?
Sometimes.
Squats.
Hey, we're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. Our guest today is Peter F. Hamilton. I am Josh Hayes here with Chuck Manley and Scott Moon. Also, we're doing squats on the show pretty regularly. This is an inside joke for a viewer who is now up to like 12 squats she's going to have to do.
12 sets
Hopefully.
of 10, I think.
So, 12 sets of 10. So 120 squats we're now at.
120 squats. Well, that just added 20 more, right?
That is a lot of squats.
I mean, it's a lot.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for getting in on it.
Well, guess squats count double. So
Yeah, I think they
good.
should,
Yeah,
Right.
that's good.
especially when they're calling from the other side of the planet.
That's
almost.
true. The English squats are a bit different. They are twofers, and so you better get going.
You have to
Peter
do
F.
'em with a
Hamilton
cricket
is
bat.
the author of numerous novels, including The Abyss Beyond Dreams, Great North Road, The Evolutionary Void, the Void trilogy, Pandora's Star, Judas Unchained, as well as Mint Spent Youth and Fallen Dragon, and also the Knights Dawn trilogy, which is enormous. And if you haven't read it, set aside like 3 months because it's huge. It's well over, I think, over 1 million words for that trilogy.
Wow.
He lives with his family in England, and he has just released a brand new book,
Pimp it.
Salvation,
Hey.
which is a huge tome of a book. And I am listening to the audio version right now. I've got 3 hours left, 2 hours and 47 minutes left in the story. So I have no idea how it's going to end. No spoilers today, but it's a very good book. Peter, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to come out and hang out with us.
No, thank you.
We had you back on in season 1, I think. It's been about 2 years probably since we've had you on the show. And I remember talking just briefly about Salvation and what you were doing with the book back then. So maybe for our viewers that aren't familiar with you and your writing, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got into writing?
How I got into writing? Same as everyone else. I mean, if you line up 10 writers and ask them what they have in common, the one thing we will all have in common is that we were huge readers when we were younger. So I kind of had it in the back of my head that this is something I'd like to try. And then I'm giving my age away here, mid-20s, I literally, circumstances happened that made it possible. I went out and bought a typewriter. I showed it to my kids the other day and they were like, what is that? Still got it, yeah. Anyway, so mid-20s, started writing the classic way up through science fiction short stories. And you get published, and you get published in something a little bit more professional and so on. And then you finally work up to, okay, let's try writing a novel, which I did. And that was, now let's see, it was written in about 89, 90 and got published in 93, which was Lone Star Rising. So that's how it all started, really.
Awesome.
Fairly traditional route.
You know, we actually talked about in the last week's episode, we talked a lot about world building, and Lone Star Rising came up because Chuck has never read any of your works, and he picked up.
I started for this interview.
I said you
That's the
started.
segment we like to call Burn Chuck.
I'm more of a fantasy guy. I do enjoy the science fiction. I just cut my teeth
Did you guys see
on
that
fantasy.
bus
so.
that just drove by that I shoved Chuck in front of?
All right.
He said that he had just picked that book up, and I said that's probably one of the best Peter F. Hamilton books to start with because it's very easy to get into, and I say that not that the rest of your books are hard to get into. It's just you have to know what you're getting into when you get one of your novels.
That's a common problem. I mean, do you hit the ground running, or do you lead the reader in gently? Constant source of conflict between me and my other friends that write. I'd like to think, certainly if you read something like Great North Road, I start you off fairly gently with that, leads into a police procedural, and then you go through the world and find out where you are and what's happening. So yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, I really liked the beginning and kind of, well, like the first quarter of Great North Road, where you're going on that investigation and you're learning about Earth, and then also what's going on with the other planet, and the investigation, the technology, and how you kind of show everybody how the technology works without doing a whole lot of info dumping, which a lot of your books are very world building heavy, and I want to get into that also in a little bit. But with Salvation specifically, a lot of world building, and very, very cool world building, in a sense that you get it. You get world building from like 3 different specific time periods, and I thought that was very interesting structurally wise. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Salvation and kind of what went on in the inspiration for that?
Yeah, sure. It's set, well, there's two main timelines. One is set 200 years in the future. The other's about 10,000 years. The one 200 years in the future, we find an alien spaceship on the very edge of where we've explored in the galaxy. I think it's about 80 light years away. And a team inevitably is sent out to investigate this thing. And as the team goes towards it, they each tell their story. As you say, they're set in various times since this new technology, this portal technology, which changed the world, came into being. So you get a feel through their stories for the world itself. I world build through these stories so that by the time they reach the alien ship, we know more about the world. And it's also tied in with the reason that these people specifically were chosen. And the other timeline is 10,000 years in the future is the consequence of what happens when they reach this spaceship. So although I did it this way around because I've always liked this idea of the voyage out and people telling their stories. Now it's quite similar to what Dan Simmons used in Hyperion.
Yeah.
So I've had this scheme of doing it for about 10 years, and I've wondered, people think I'm just taking it off Dan Simmons, but hey, I'm 22 books into my career. I don't care if people think that anymore.
Right.
Take a calculated risk.
Plus, Simmons nicked it off Chaucer in the first place, so we're kind of both guilty of that.
And
It's
there's
a
nothing
good
new
way.
under the sun either. I mean, everybody borrows from everybody. That's just the way
exactly.
it's done.
Yeah. The other reason I split this between the sort of near future and the far future is because had I not put the far future stuff into this book, you would have had part 1 and 2 near future, then part 3 10,000 years in the future. And I don't think that's fair to the reader. So I'm kind of mixing them all up a bit. And I do promise, if you're a reader, that they will all connect and make sense in the last book.
That I was just going to mention that because I couldn't remember whether it was going to be 2 books or 3 books, and I was talking to Scott about it before you hopped on, and I mentioned that the Hyperion similarity, which I really like. If it done correctly, it really works, and I was telling him this is a true like beginning trilogy book because you get so much world building and so much character. You almost don't have anywhere to go but up once you finish the first book, and it's great. I mean, I'm really enjoying the audio version. One of the questions I had when we had the last interview, and you mentioned this, and you what's it's been 2 years, at least 2 or 3
2 years
working on Salvation.
Oh yeah. Okay.
When did you first get the idea for Salvation, and then how long? Because there's a lot of, like you say, going back and forth between timelines and then keeping that stuff straight. So there's obviously a lot of work that went in to formatting the book structurally to get it presented in the right way for the reader. How long do you think you've been?
Well, you're bucking out there.
Yeah, you're going robot
sorry.
voice on us.
Oh, was I really? Oh,
I heard most of what you said, but
basically my question was, if I'm coming through okay now, is Salvation's a huge project. Basically, how long have you been working on that to put it all together so it makes sense for the reader? Because obviously you go back and forth between timelines a whole bunch.
how do you keep that straight?
I'm a huge note maker to start with. I mean, the whole project, the 3 books, will take me 3 to 4 years. The first 6 months is just spent completely writing out the notes, getting it all sorted. That's a combination of world building, getting the planets right. Once you start with where you're going to set it and what year you're going to set it, okay, well, what technologies do you have in that year? How will they affect society? Which is the part of science fiction I love, is how things knock on and change us in ways we don't realize at the moment. So that extrapolation was great fun. Okay, so then when you've got the world and the society, you know what kind of people live in the society. So who out of them can you choose as your characters? And that's the build. It's an organic process. They sort of layer on top of each other's. Each one makes the next layer more obvious to me. Then when I've got the characters and the setting, then I go back, because I have the initial idea for what the story is. Then you work out the order the story is told in, which in this case, like you say, it's quite complex, but at the end will all make sense. And I should point out for something like this, I have to know how it ends before I start writing. Something this complicated, you can't write and just start writing and hope. Now, that's my method of working. I know there's a lot of authors out there that can just have a vague idea, sit down and write page 1, chapter 1. I envy them, they envy me, basically.
everybody envy each other in a big circle. That's what
the grass is always greener on the other side, isn't
so
it?
if there's an aspiring author out there, this is not the Bible way of doing it, okay? This is not gospel. It's the one that works for me.
So I'm curious about so you spend 6 months making different types of notes. Do you do any types of free writing? Do you outline it all during that, or are you just purely building your world and getting your concept or whatever?
Getting the concept right. I know what sections, if you like. I know what scenes have to be built in. So, like I say, it's an organic process. I'll start off writing, doing the world building, and from that will come the outlines. Each chapter is outlined quite rigidly. I'll know where the character starts, and I know where I've got to get the character to. Having said that, it's also loose enough so that any new ideas come in while I'm writing, I can feed them in, which invariably means halfway through the book, I then have to go back to the chapter notes for the end and rewrite them all to take into account what's been coming in. So, although yes, it's a fairly rigid process, it's also got some flexibility built into it for me.
Well, we're touching on world building. One of the notes I had was because you spend so much time planning and world building and creating this technology in the worlds. Do you ever feel like, I know some writers, they get in that world building rut where that's all they do is world build and then the story never gets written?
Right.
Do you ever feel like you get into a situation like that where you're doing too much world building and you're like, I really just need to stop doing this and write the book? Or how do you find a really healthy medium there from between the world building and the actual writing?
It's kind of instinctive these days. If I've spent 2 or 3 months doing nothing but world building, I know that's when I need to get on and actually do the outlines, do the plots. So for me, there is no, like I said, there is no set rules for any of this. It's how you feel comfortable. The more you write this stuff, the more you get a feeling for what you're doing. I'd like to say therefore you need less editing, but I'd be false in that. All this builds up, and experience does actually count for a lot in this.
Do you have any? I'm kind of the random question guy. So if that annoys me, then you just the way we tap out of that. If you don't want to answer a question, you say squat, and then you move on, and then we just pretend like I never said anything. So just keep that in mind. But so my question is do you have any favorite or moments of the writing process that you want to talk to us about? Because I know, like a lot of writers, you'll be like, well, there was that time I came up with this idea or something. So is there any moments during the creation of Salvation that stand out as being particularly epic?
Okay, well, I won't do a squat on that one. I'll answer that.
Yay!
He's up to like 1,000 now, I think.
There's so many squats.
Our editor is going to be so in shape by the end.
All the better to kick our asses with.
Yeah, and she will. Anyway.
Writing it. There are a couple of moments and things you hadn't connected consciously. They suddenly make like an unconscious connection. You go, oh yeah, that would feed in nicely to that. There was a few of those in Salvation. I'm not going to drag them out because I know we're not allowed to do spoilers.
But we don't care
yeah,
about Josh. No, I'm kidding.
It doesn't happen too often, but I think my subconscious must kind of bubble away in the background while I'm writing quite a bit. Yeah.
I always get the problem where I'll have a morning or a day of good writing, where I'll get going and then I have to stop, or I have to go to bed, and then as soon as I lay down, then that light bulb comes on, and I'm like, why didn't I think of that 2 hours ago while I was in the front of the computer writing?
It's always when you relax and everything kind of.
I like having the brilliant idea at night, and then you wake up, and then it's not a brilliant idea after all. After that was a terrible idea. But when you're trying to go to sleep, it seemed like a great idea until you got up and looked at what you scribbled down in the morning. What was that? Sometimes you're okay.
Yeah, there's one of the functions on the phone is notes, and I will be making constant notes when I'm not writing. I have a fairly rigid writing schedule. I mean, in the morning I will go over what I did yesterday, polish it up, maybe think of a new, some new ideas come in there that I can feed in later. So by lunchtime, I'll be back where I finished off yesterday, and it'll be fresh in my mind again when I just start the afternoon. Again, this is not the perfect way of writing. Find your own way, but that's the one that works for me.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the questions I had written down. It was the last question actually I had written down. Is going over the previous day's writing. So when you go over that, do you do any type of editing, or is it just kind of going back and plunging back into the story so you feel like you're right there again, or how does that work specifically?
Yeah, it's kind of the old question of how many times do I draft a manuscript doesn't really apply when I'm using Word, because I use word processing these days. So I do this constant revision of things that I did yesterday. Yes, it's editing. Yes, it's polishing the prose. Yes, it's making sure things make more sense. So it is this constant upgrade, if you like, of what has been written before. So that when I do finally write the end, I can send it off pretty much straight away to the editor, rather than then spend 2, 3, 4 months going through it doing this drafting thing. It's just not part of the modern writing process for me.
Right. One of the things that is interesting about your going over, like, because you go in Word, you write what you write, and then you read it again, and then you write. So my question is for Salvation, with how the plethora of POV characters that you have, and also the different timelines, when you went through and wrote it, did you do individual plot arcs and then put it all back together after the fact, or did you just go from beginning to end and write it through? I mean, obviously you're going to have an outline for it, but when you're writing it, was it easier for you, or how do you find it better to go through and actually write the story?
Good question for this one. There's obviously the fairly thinly sketched out plot arcs, if you like. There is a section of this, and it's not a spoiler, which is a noir detective scene. And I've got two gangs set in New York, and trying to keep track of who is in which gang and which gang they are and who they're related to and why they're doing that was a nightmare to write. Very, very complicated. I mean, we went through that so many times on the edits to make sure. I think it still needs one tiny correction, which I don't know if they managed to get in time. But yeah, that was incredibly detailed, whereas some of the other stuff is just like, a couple of lines on the page. So it kind of depends on the section you're writing and how deeply you have to go into the arcs to keep them straight, make sure they make sense to the reader and to yourself. So again, it's a variable. Something like I said, the detective work really has to be thought out very hard, and there will be a lot of note making for that, a lot of story arcs. And I still managed to get it slightly wrong.
When there's certain reader expectations for a detective story to make sense in a certain way, so you probably can't just wing that in.
No.
You got to have the right payoff.
Like I say, it's got to be thought out in advance. Not just the whodunit and the dropping the clues in, but as I say, in this case, it was complex in terms of who was doing what, when, where, which was fun to keep track of. Put it that way.
Do you use any type of like timeline, like sort of like a written timeline, or is that just part of your note taking process?
That's part of the notes. Oh, I have a timeline specifically for me. There is a timeline, I think, in the back or the front of the book, but I have a more detailed one, especially when it comes to sections like that, which happen over 1 or 2 days. Then it almost goes down to an hour by hour count on what's happening when.
Excellent.
So, like I said, I've got a couple hours left to finish on the audiobook, and unless I've missed something, which it's completely possible, in this book you don't see a basically an archetype of a villain so far in this book where you can point out and you're like, that's the villain that they have to beat in the book, whereas like in the Nightstone trilogy, right? There's no Morning Light Mountain, and there's no what's his name from the Nightstone trilogy, Quinn
Dexter.
Yeah. So did you do that on purpose? Was that interesting to do, where you don't actually see, like, it's not presented as this is the bad guy in this book?
I'm going to give you a slight spoiler here.
Yes.
It is there, but you haven't got to it yet. It's kind of a slow build. When you get to the end, you'll go, I hope. That was the intention. There is a villain in there. Don't you worry.
I read one of the reviews on Amazon today that basically said, yeah, the whole book comes together like in the last 15 pages or so, and it all is like...
It's really more of a series arc.
Yeah.
The Commonwealth Saga was like that. I mean, you had the resolution, but the resolution, like the grand, is like such thing as a grand resolution for the larger story arc.
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of cliffhanger and resolution, as you say. It's the resolution that hands you over to book 2.
Not like the cliffhanger, which is literally a cliffhanger in Pandora's Star. When if you're
going to do cliffhangers, don't mess around with metaphors.
Right over. I think Pandora's Star was the first time I'd ever read one of your stories, and I was listening on an audiobook, and the end is very literally somebody going over a cliff in a boat, and I'm like, are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. Now luckily Judas Unchained was already out, so I just had to download the next book, but I was like, now he took cliffhanger to a whole other level when he's...
Yeah, you should have seen the email I got from my editor when she finished reading that. It was...
I bet it was angry.
It was along the lines of, you better resolve this quickly.
Listen, mister.
Oh, that's crazy. One of our viewers actually touched on one of the topics I wanted to touch on too, is Space Goblin says, I like the aliens in your novels. They are so not human, which is one of the things I thought that is very unique.
That, the world building too is make a truly unique aliens.
Right, and sometimes it's really difficult to make a truly unique alien because you have so many human traits.
Just put some clay right here,
right? or pointy ears. Yeah. So how long
we are well past the era of rubber masks, I think. Right. This all goes back to world building again. It's not just the human worlds you've got to work out and make function in your own mind. I do try and make the aliens as alien as possible. They have their own motivations, but we don't understand them. This being a basic concept of alien. But if you go back far enough and if you do enough world building for them, they all have their own internal logic. Whether you're doing this, it depends on how far back you go. I think in Morning Light Mountain, I went back to their whole evolution. The way they've evolved, their biology makes their psychology perfect for them, but it is completely alien to us. So once you go back and once you filter out all the human traits and yet have them build a society at the same time, then you have something that's really quite formidable, I hope.
Yeah, I really actually one of my favorite aliens in your book is Morning Light Mountain, just because he's and we talked about it in the last episode too, or the last time you were on the show, is that he's so alien and he's so not human.
Not
but
even
everything he
interested in
does,
being human in any way.
right? He doesn't care. He's not. He doesn't want to meet you. He doesn't want to have dinner with you. He just
Let's
he's focused
your
on
stuff.
his drive, and I thought that was very. It's you have a whole you have several books that have these big bad, I want to conquer the universe because I want to control everything and enslave races and things like that, and you're like, yeah, okay, that whatever. But then Morning Light Mountain, he's basically doing the same thing, but he doesn't have any ambition to rule the galaxy. He just is.
He
that's
just
what
wants
he
all
does.
this. He wants all the stuff.
Yeah,
When
that's right.
when I grew up, my dad used to have a bumper sticker on his car, and it said, "He who has the most stuff
Those
wins."
toys wins. Yeah.
He has the most toys wins, and that was the defining, one of my defining principles growing up, obviously. But
Yeah.
that we grew up with. But so that's Morning Light Mountain, like to the 50th power or whatever. Just, I
Yeah.
get everything, including all your air you're going to breathe, all the water you're going to drink. It's all mine. So, anyway,
Squats.
moving on. Yeah, I can say squat. Yeah, squat also works to fill an awkward silence when I've made some irrational statements. So that's for you, Ellen. So.
I'm also curious in the afternoon, a lot of times when I write, I'll go for like 3 or 4 hours, and that's pretty much my max creativity zone for the day. When you start to write new words in the afternoon, do you have a like a word count you like to hit, or do you just like to hit landmark points as you write?
I used to. I don't at the moment. I mean, like everyone, I'm quite slack when I'm starting to write the book, but as the deadline approaches, then that afternoon session kind of gets longer and longer and longer. I'm up to about 9:30 at night at the moment because the deadline is, shall we say, pressing for selfish. I hope my editor is listening to this. Yeah,
No, we won't tell them.
it's only a page away. Honestly, it really is.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, again, it's another variable. I am working quite late at the moment because I've got to get this finished, and I am very, very near the end. So I will probably be working late tonight and late all week. So yeah, it's kind of, you always think at the start, oh, if I just do a few hours now and do this constantly, I can get to the end on time. It hasn't worked out as much as I'd like it to. I've had excuses. I've just moved house, and the kids are in school now, so we've got to do school runs and lots of good excuses. This is what writers do best: is prevaricate. We are experts. Right.
We have they put our full creative genius onto excuse making and see what happens. I mean,
if I had that much brain power devoted to actually writing the book, wow.
Yeah,
Yep.
there you go.
It's just a different kind of creativity.
On the topic of goal setting and stuff, you ever like set, I don't know how you set your goals, but do you ever set a goal like on a good day versus a bad day? And what I'm getting at is sometimes you're like, well, oh man, I had a great day today. I can easily write 5,000 words a day, and then set your goals accordingly. And that's
absolutely, yeah. But even on those bad days, I will still plug at it, and even if it's only a page done, then at least I feel like I've accomplished something. You can't let the bad days grind you down, basically.
Right.
When you're writing, I do write every day during the week. Like I say, sometimes many pages, sometimes one. It all depends on how well it's going these days. And I'm sure you're going to ask at some point the old writer's block question, which, when you're doing it the way I do, the detailed notes, the chapter outlines, the character arcs, it doesn't really apply because I know what I've got to write. Yeah, some days it's tough to write it, but I always know what I've got to write. The equivalent of writer's block for me would be not coming up with that original idea, which hasn't happened, touch wood, yet. I mean, I've backed up about 5 or 6 novels in my head at the moment, so right. I'm okay with that. But yeah, that when you have the bad days, there's nothing. We all have them. There's nothing much you can do about them except keep on plugging away. And then you go away, and then the thought will come, oh, why didn't I do that? That would solve this problem. And then it'll flow, if not the next day, the day after.
It's like a regular day job. You got to go to work
Yeah,
They don't pay you unless you show up. Most jobs.
yeah, yeah. Everyone thinks it's an incredibly romantic profession. You know, you'll write a paragraph and then go down to the bar for the rest of the day.
Right.
No, it's not.
That's what we're all
Sadly.
doing wrong.
That's
You get to chew on your pipe while you're reading books, and
Yeah,
that's
Yeah.
what Chuck does anyway.
That's it.
Chuck
Yeah.
does have a pipe.
And they
I'm
just
kind of in
they back little dump trucks full of money up to my front door and just
Right. You're like,
just
Put
dump
that
it
over
out
there.
and just shovel it onto the pile.
I'm kind of in the same place where you're at, where I don't really deal with writer's block as a thing where I'm like, yeah, I don't know what to write. A lot of the stuff happens when I have a chapter that I know what I need to do in the chapter, and in the outline process I have, this is how I want to start the chapter. Well, then when I get there, that way to starting out the chapter doesn't work for some reason, or I feel like it needs to be a little better or a little punchier at the opening, and so I'll get stuck sometimes trying to figure out how to open that scene or how to make it a little better.
you
But
get
then
hung
once
up
I
on
get
that.
into it,
You get hung up on that sometimes, and the words they sound bad. You get in that phrase where everything you write is terrible, but when you look at them later, you can't tell the difference between the words you're struggling with and the words that seem to be better in the beginning.
yeah,
Seems like.
yeah, absolutely.
Just
Let me
keep
go ahead
going.
and read the show sponsor here real quick. Since we're at the halfway point. The sponsor for this episode is Order of the Centurion. It's a Galaxy's Edge book by Jason Onspach and Nick Cole. This is the first book in a new series of standalone novels that are going to be coming out over the next several months. I'm not sure when mine's going to come out. It's either 3 or 4 months away, but I haven't got the edits back yet, so we'll be interested to see when that comes out. But I'll read you the blurb. The Order of the Centurion is the highest award that can be bestowed upon any individual serving in or with the Legion. When such an individual displays exceptional valor in action against an enemy force, an uncommon loyalty and devotion to the Legion and its legionnaires, refusing to abandon post, mission, or brothers, even unto death, the Legion dutifully recognizes such courage with this award. Tired of sitting out the war on Sidon in a mobile office hab, Legion Lieutenant Washam agrees to undertake a covert and unsanctioned mission with a band of Republic Recon Marines.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Inserted deep behind enemy lines, the strike force uncovers a surprise key to ending a bitter war. Now they must navigate a hostile jungle teeming with murderous alien rebels, pushing themselves to the limits of their abilities to get this vital intel to Legion Command, if they can survive that long. The Order of the Centurion is an all-new series of standalone military science fiction novels set in the Galaxy's Edge universe, ranging from the Savage Wars to the arrival of the Black Fleet. Each book features the legendary heroes of the Legion who forgot nothing in their earning of the Legion's highest honor. I need to do lip stretches before
You didn't do the dramatic ending voice. And you forgot.
Sorry. Who forgot nothing in the earning of the Legion's highest honor.
There you go. And
I'm
I
not
didn't
sure.
hear anything about squats in that book description, so you need to get a hold of
And
Nick and
squats.
Jason and make them fix that. So
The price will be paid in squats.
That's
so
what
I
I
put
heard.
the link in the live chat. It's also going to be in the show notes as well. Order of the Centurion by Jason Onspach and Nick Cole.
that's not your book. That's the first book in the series.
That's the first one.
Okay.
No, my book is called Strikers War.
Anyway,
I'm not sure who's going to be out first. I think Jonathan Yanez's book is going to be out first after this one. So that book, it's on pre-order now. I think it releases on the 21st. Go check it out. Go read it. They're great. Galaxy's Edge is a really good series by them. Speaking of putting books out, right at the beginning, you were starting how you said you got started in short stories and then kind of progressed through, small presses up to the more prestigious presses. Do you still think that's a viable way for a science fiction author to start out now? Especially with indie publishing and the way that traditional publishing is doing things What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thoughts on this are about 20 years out of date. The indie press has come along and changed everything basically. The print magazines certainly, sadly, are a lot fewer, but then there's more online stuff coming along. So I guess it swings and roundabouts. But I'm still a trad publisher, so I think an agent, even if you're if you're self-publishing or trying to get short stories sold, I think an agent always helps. They're a good foot in the door. They know their market. They know the traditional publishers. They can get you the advances. So that would be my advice. I don't know much about self-publishing, I'm afraid.
Do you think that, and again, you can always tap out by saying squad if you don't want to answer this, but do you think that some people are just short story writers, some people are just novel writers, or what's the challenge going between the two? As far are those different mediums, I guess.
Yeah, okay. I won't squat out on this one. I'll answer it as well.
Good.
We should have started a tally.
We should.
Yeah,
There's no accountability in this process at all.
I started out writing short stories. I'm kind of notorious for the length of books I write. There are very different rules, if you like, for writing short stories. There are very different procedures. I've kind of lost the art of it. I mean, I managed to produce maybe one short story every couple of years these days, whereas before I was doing 2 or 3 a month back when I was starting. So yeah, it's a different art, and you get into the habit of writing novels, and this art fades away from you. So, and there are some people who are absolutely amazing short story writers, Ted Chiang being the prime example at the moment. Right. I mean, every short story from him is to be cherished. But yeah, I'm not the most prolific short story writer at the moment. I think I've got one I've promised for an anthology coming up. I've got to deliver by January, and he told me that 2 years ago. So I really have no excuse this time. But sure yeah, the art it's a different art. I don't know if you guys have him over there. Roald Dahl was featured in my childhood reading. He wrote perfect short stories because you've got to have character setting, and then you always had a good twist in the tale, or it ended on a pun, or it ended on something that made you sit up and go, wow. And that's kind of my criteria for short stories. Too many that I read these days are just ideas that are written down. They kind of have no beginning, middle, ending anymore.
Right.
Just, look what I can do with words, and look, I've thought this up, but it doesn't go anywhere. That's the critic in me. I get worse at being a critic as I get older. So yeah, short stories and I are kind of diverging now.
Well, you did write A Window into Time a couple of years ago, and that's more kind of like a novella, I think. More than
it's novella length. Yeah, it was my another take on the concept of time travel. Rather than getting in a machine, the whole universe is more spiritual and more geared up around this. Again, I don't want to do spoilers, but yeah, it was nice and different, and I didn't think that warranted a novel. It wasn't long enough to stretch out to a novel. So, and I'll say this, I always say this: a story is its own length. I mean, I don't write huge books because I want to keep up that page count. Trust me, I don't want to.
Sounds like so much fun.
But every story has its own. If you're writing about something that is threatening an entire galaxy, this is not something that's going to be wound up in 100 pages.
Right.
You've got to go into it in the depth that kind of story requires.
Well, and one of the things you mentioned in our first show, the going to the library and getting just caught up in sci-fi novels back in the day, and the kind of escapism thing that you're looking for. I think that's one of the biggest things that I mean, it's basically a true, you might even be on Earth, but it's a completely different setting with new technologies, and you kind of get pulled into that. Is that specifically when you go into to write these novels or these stories? Are you looking to I mean, you're looking to maintain or just heighten that feeling of escapism for the reader. Because I mean, there's a lot of writers that do like character centric books or plot centric books. You kind of combine those into the same project, and it creates a very well-rounded novel where you're not just getting plot and a little bit of character or a lot of character and no plot.
Thank you. Right. Yeah. No. That's absolutely my main goal. Is somebody can sit down with one of my books and can just leave whatever is going on around them, and it's an escape route out. I think that's incredibly important. It's what science fiction does better than anybody else. At the same time, there's stuff in there that hopefully will make people think. I don't want to write just something that's incredibly difficult and hard to get into, but there's stuff in there. If one person reads one of my books and goes, "Oh, didn't think about that happening that way," then I've won. At the same time, if they're entertained by shootouts and tension and all that kind of thing, I've also won. So this is great. This is what science fiction can do. It can do both of them.
I really like the and it comes kind of later in the book, but it's the thought of the utopian societies or the different societies that you have, and then to get into that society, you basically have to give up your gender, so to speak, which is the way that they looked at making equality actually true equality, and that was a pretty cool take on it, I thought.
It's not a hugely original. I mean, Banks did it well in the culture books. Somebody mentioned The Left Hand of Darkness, which I'd completely forgotten about the other day.
Yeah.
It was obviously bubbling away in the background of my head again. Yeah, it was. But again, this is the modern remix on this take. This is, and it's quite current as well. Every science fiction book is a look at the world we live in today. And equality and gender is huge themes at the moment. Yeah. So that was kind of my take on that. I'm not doing any spoilers when I say that the idea of this utopian society was that the technology is there to build all the consumer goodies we need at very little cost. It's not quite socialist communist thing, but it's the technologist's answer. It's not quite singularity, but getting there. It's a kind of blend of these ideas. And yet the world on Earth is still fairly capitalist orientated and works for a lot of people. But if you can get away from Earth and you have space to expand in and you can build colonies, then we can start to try and experiment with other types of societies. And so this idea for utopias comes along. But to get people to commit, the guys that put it together insist on you have your children's genes changed. So they cycle between male and female on the premise and the theory that gender is the root of inequality. So if we're both male and female, which is, I call them omnia, this will eradicate, and it's all very wonderful. And then of course this society gets quite smug about itself because everything else, they are human. So it's not quite there, and then that's where conflict comes in with the existing societies. So that, it's a take on it, and take it. Oh, if we could do this, would it work really well? Well, no, it wouldn't, because we're human after all.
I'm always curious about how that works when they start to reintegrate. As the experiment, as the luster wears off, and then you get back in the other things. Yeah,
well, that was why they insisted on this commitment. It's not something you're committing your descendants to this philosophy, to this society, which. Is that authoritarianism? I don't know. It's again a good science fiction question.
Yeah, right.
Raising the issues. Would you actually want to do that, or would you want the option of opting out? In which case, start your version of the society if you've got space and resources to do everything.
It raises the timeless question: what could possibly go wrong? Right.
Absolutely.
That's something we ask ourselves every day on the show. And it usually involves doing squats or carrying a coyote on your back, but that's from another episode. So
or Scott just trying to log in to the show.
Yeah,
They
that's
used to-
also a problem. Technology is not my friend generally. Speaking.
Speaking of technology, the other part of salvation goes. You said 10,000 years into the future. Um, the it basically follows some kids in a, I say kids loosely, but they're basically in like a war kind of a military school training, but you don't really know who they're training to fight, and they reference the enemy, and um very very cool transition between the two timelines. And you said at the beginning that you wanted to have parts of this book in the first book so that when we get to the second and third books, we're not kind of slammed with these new characters. um how hard is it for you to come up with, I mean, 10,000 years, uh you don't typically see those time spans unless you're talking about like epic fantasy, and in epic fantasy nothing changes, right? In the 10,000 years from the beginning to nothing, absolutely nothing changes. But obviously in a science fiction book, when you're talking about that many years of time to go by, was it hard for you to come up with or to think about the different technologies, the way people would look at technology or look at society that far ahead in the future?
Yeah, you always get the problem of how far you can go with technology. I kind of solved it with this one in that everything is plateaued. You know, computers can't get any smaller, AIs can't get any smarter. I mean, they're very, very smart, don't get me wrong. And so much is taken for granted. This is, you know, they don't have material wants. But they have this task to do, which they were born to do, and whether they wanted to or not, they start to realize that they've been given no choice in life. It's what they exist for. So that was kind of my take on that. It's and again, the child soldiers, the training camps, and all that. That's part of a fine tradition of science fiction. Hopefully, by sort of book 2 and 3, you'll see a slightly different slant on this creeping in, but. The whole concept of these kids, I wanted you to feel a lot of empathy for them, that they have no choice, like so many of us do these days. So again, it's kind of looking around the world and seeing what I see. I mean, there are horrible numbers of kids being conscripted into military, you know, for authoritarian regimes, for guerrilla actions, for freedom fighters, whatever you want to call them, all who think they're doing the right thing. Which again is an important part of my writing to be. There are no people who think they're the bad guy. Everyone thinks they're the good guy. Everyone has a logical explanation for what they do, and they see you as the bad guy. You can't write, or I don't want to write, someone who's definitely bad and definitely good without giving the explanation why they act the way they do. Like I say, bad guys don't think they're bad.
Right.
So you have to, and this is part of the character detail, is that they're doing what they do because they believe in it, and it's up to you as the reader to decide if they're right or wrong.
Well, I'm really interested to find out who the bad guy is. I'm going to probably turn on the recording as soon as we're done here and finish, because I have an idea. Like,
I heard that he was a red shirt named Josh Hayes.
yeah.
Well, actually, terrible villain in all the books.
That's an awesome question. I don't know if you can answer this or not. I mean, you can, whether you will or not. So
well, see if I go squat on it. So
yes,
squat is the option. If you want to not, you just say squat.
So a couple of years ago, you did a judging for a Facebook group for Space Officer group that Scott McGlasson runs. I'm going to pat myself on the back and say I won 3rd place that time with a short story it was titled Salvation, the same way your novel was. But in the book, you have a character whose last name is McGlasson. And so I was wondering if that was a red shirt or a callback to, did you steal that from Scott McGlasson? Because if you did, that'd be really cool.
I'm owning up to. I'm not. He's not really a red shirt, so I'm going to own up to. Yeah, I gave him the name check.
As soon as I read it, I was like, "Oh, he did." That's very
awesome.
cool. That's very cool. Nice.
You know, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Scott.
One of the things I struggle with a lot is writing. One of the biggest momentum killers for me in all of world building is names. So, what's some good tips for having good names? Because you can start writing by just a generic thing, but kind of names have power sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. I'll name check some of my friends, but that's not the character. That's just the name.
Right.
They don't have that big a role, to be honest. And I can kill them off when I want, which is always important with friends.
Yeah.
No, on a very basic level, if you're choosing names, don't choose ones with the same, beginning with the same letter all the time. Make sure they're spaced out so that people can differentiate between them. That's incredibly important. And yeah, you're right about names having a lot of meaning. The guy in Great North Road, our everyman, is called Sid, specifically because he's the everyman. That's about the most, I don't know how you describe it, basic name you can have. Right. Everybody knows Sid. He's you. He's me. He's the guy down the road you have a beer with. So yeah, names are important, and they should reflect where the people come from. To my mind, yeah. So yeah, but I'm with you on choosing, actually getting out the pen and paper and writing them down. That can be difficult. You've got to go through a lot of permutations, a lot of editing on that.
I find that interesting. You mentioned the name starting with the same letter, because I think most of us here have done that. Where you're writing and you're like, how come all of the people in the story start with M? All their names start with M, and it's just a weird thing. I've seen it happen, and you need to have the variability, but like also nationalities or dealing with like fantasy names, like for Chuck and some of his urban fantasy, or how do you deal with names as like making sure the reader is going to be able to somehow pronounce them or deal with them? Do you have tips on that?
Yeah, the pronunciation's a good one. When I was writing Night's Dawn, the Tyathka, I did 2 capital letters at the end and with it separated from the actual name with a dash. Why on earth did I do that? I was young. I thought it looked cool. I would not do that these days. Maybe an apostrophe in the middle or something like that. Yeah, you've got to try and make them, if they're alien names or fantasy names or future names or names from some other part of the world you're not familiar with. You've got to make them distinctive, but not absurdly so. You've got to be quite careful about that. So yeah, that's a trap I try and avoid getting into these days.
I think audiobooks make that interesting. If you read the print book and then you listen to the audiobook and you're like, what does he keep saying that word for? Oh, wait.
Kind of like your Quinn Dexter character, Quinn Dexter, or Dexter Quinn rather. I can't remember which way it goes now.
Quinn Dexter.
Quinn Dexter. Yeah. You read that and you're like, oh yeah, that's a bad guy name.
Some names are just bad.
I think you want to make them noticeable without making them distracting.
I did see a survey on Facebook that it was our guest, Shannon Mayer. She said she did a survey of all of her reader base, which is a huge reader base, and for a villain name, and they not unanimously, but overwhelming majority picked Steve. So sorry, Steve.
Really,
you're a bad guy.
I do remember that.
I'm not sure Steven counts, but. I'm not sure.
I always, you say Steve to me, I think Steve McQueen. I think they're like the heroes. I don't ever think villain.
I don't know. I didn't.
For some reason, Seth has always been a good villain.
Seth
name
sounds sinister to me.
Yeah,
that's definitely a bad guy name.
Squat.
You mentioned that you
Squat. Yeah. Seth Squat.
Squat's a horrible name.
Yeah.
You mentioned.
Oh, by the way,
pick up on your deadline for turning in the next book. Do you have any idea when that might come out? I mean, obviously your
it will be out this time next year. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am very, very close to that. It's called Salvation Lost, by the way, but it'll be handed in this week, next week. So yeah, it'll be out there by this time next year, and book 3 will be out the following year as well. Where are we? 2020. So yeah, it will be 1 a year, and it won't suddenly become 4 or 5 parts either. It will end on 3.
You have I mean, hey, you did Pandora Star and Judas Unchained as a duology, and then the Void trilogy came out later.
Yeah.
Are you leaving this kind of open to do the same thing, or once the trilogy's done, it's wrapped up and moving on to something else?
It will. There's an option to do some more in this world. Yeah, but we're talking 2 years down the line here.
Sure.
I don't
Yeah,
know what
absolutely.
my priorities will be there.
We need a firm commitment right now.
Well, hand me a firm contract.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I squat. So I just have to. By the way, our infamous, maybe not completely secret editor who's doing all the squats says that I cheated by the way I set up this show, because the deal
She
was,
knows what.
yeah, you squat. You know, if you got the mic, you get to do this squat. You say squat.
Yeah, she also accuses us of being high.
Well,
I
no.
cannot confirm
On
or
life.
deny.
On life.
Not, yeah, high on life.
On life. See?
High on life.
And the internet.
Well, Peter, it's been an awesome hour here talking with you, and it flew
Oh,
by.
thanks.
I'm grateful that you were able to step away from the manuscript for an hour and hang out and have fun with us. It was really good.
A blast.
Sure, no problem. It's always a blast talking to you guys.
If you have not read or listened to any of Peter's books, you're wrong, and you need to.
Well, I know what I'm doing for the next 19 hours.
Yeah, I'm working on it. All right.
yeah, Chuck, you're wrong. So there you go.
Yeah.
His
The bus marks on my back. Just
that's right.
hurt.
The
They
tires. All his books are available on Amazon and ebook. You can also get them in print and audio. I would suggest my personal favorite is starting with Pandora Star. Those are two fantastic books. The world building and the just the epic feel of those books is phenomenal. Paul Amayo is one of my favorite characters, bar none of any of the characters he's ever read. So that's where I would suggest. You can start wherever you want. I'm telling you to start at Pandora Star. That's my role.
Wouldn't be wrong to start there.
Yeah, you would. Any of them you wouldn't. If you're going to start with the Knights Dawn trilogy, just remember it's like 1.5 million words, the whole thing. And those, I think
You can do it.
Yeah, you can do it. Just know what you're getting into. Peter, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us. It's been a
You're
blast.
welcome. Yeah. Cheers, guys.
All right.
Peter.
Well, we'll call it here. And I don't know what we got going on next week. Oh, Chris Barteau and David Burns are going to be on the show next Monday, back at our regular time, 8 p.m. And you guys come and hang out with us. We're going to talk about some reading. We're going to talk about some writing. And, of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. You guys have a fantastic Monday.
Later, guys.